everybody, my name is Patrick and I'm a lead pastor at Nuvo Church, and we are a brand new church that's coming to Bridge Park here in Dublin. In September, we're going to be meeting at the Exchange right here at the end of Bridge Park, and we're so excited to be launching this brand new church. Now, we're a church for people who have doubts and questions about faith, right? We would say that we're creating space for people to explore and integrate their faith, and we would say that we're a place that should look like hope and feel like home. And we'd love to invite you to be a part of it. Now today what you're gonna get is you're gonna get a preview of one of our pop-up gatherings that we've been having here around Dublin, so you kind of get a little bit of a feeling of the kind of church that we are. Now on top of that, we're also having a vision night right here in Bridge Park, and we're gonna be doing that on July 11th at Brick House Blue. We would love for you to join us for that, hear a little bit more about the kind of church that we're creating, and really kind of discover if this might be the kind of church for you. So we would love for you to join us right here on July 11th at Bridge Park.
Yeah, so here's what's so interesting. I'm actually, if I wasn't doing this, I think like marketing, advertising, all of that is so interesting. And especially like when you think about like the world of social media now. Anybody ever had like a conversation with somebody and you said something weird? Like you said something like, oh man, you know what I really need is a new razor. And then for the next 30 minutes, you saw ads for razors on your phone. Anybody else do that? It's weird, right? There's a little bit of that. And you think like it's all happening on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and then you go like you see billboards, and there's always like a line on the billboard that's geared to like kind of grab your attention, right? It might not even be true, but there's something about you that kind of leans into that. And then almost every ad that you see, I think is so interesting, especially when it comes to like fitness ads. You ever seen like fitness ads? Every fitness person, they look like something that I will never be. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that. And not only that, I don't know if you're a Nate Bargatze fan. Do we have any Nate Bargatze fans in the room? Oh, then you should go do that. You should go watch. Nate Bargatze says it this way. He goes, I look at like the before and after pictures, and I look at the before pictures like I love to look like that guy. You know what I mean? Like if I just look like the guy from the before picture, I would be happy. Like there's a little bit of that going on. And all of this is sort of geared towards getting you to think about that there's somewhere out there like a better you, right? Like somewhere beyond you, these ads and these companies are built on the idea that it's a better you. If we can go to the next one, all right, the better you, that's kind of the thought that's behind that sort of thing, right? That there's somewhere out there, there's some part of you that's a better you, and you were conditioned to think that way from the time that you were really, really little, right? And sometimes it's even like a subtle thing that goes on with your parents, right? How many of you, it's kind of hard to say in a group setting, but how many of you had a mother or a father who you desperately wanted their approval from? Like you desperately wanted some of that. Like I talk to guys all the time. They'll be like 40, 50-year-old men. And they'll have these memories of being an athlete, you know what I mean? And they remember like their father doing this sort of thing if they messed up in a game, right? And there's this thing inside that like they just kind of craved approval. Or maybe for you, there was like a teacher who made you not feel smart enough. I'll never forget, I was in 6th grade. I was taking like a pre-algebra class in 6th grade. And I'll never forget, there was a teacher that in front of the whole class, I made a B+. And she just looks at me and she says, oh, you could do so much better, couldn't you, Patrick? And in the prior class, I was like, oh, like it was a real butt clenchy. You know what I mean? Like I was real anxious and nervous and upset and embarrassed. And the assumption from that moment on was that I was not good at math. To this day, Excel makes me want to cry, and it does the math for you. You know what I mean? Like there's something about those kinds of things. For some of you, it's like a friend, right? Some of you had a group of friends, maybe there's one or two friends in that sort of thing that you compare yourself to. Now, I'm not a woman, and I'm certainly not a mother, but I would say I talk to moms all the time, and there's like moms and then mom blogs, and you see mom blogs, they have everything together. Like there are women that wake up at like 5 a.m. and they just ready. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. And they're just ready. And you're like, what is that? And you're like, there's no way that that's true. Like you're going through an Instagram story and it's like her kids are just sitting there politely, yes, mommy. You know what I mean? Like this whole thing, the whole time. And you're like, I know that's not real. But there's this part of you that just kind of compares that sort of thing. And then I talk to people all the time who are empty nesters as well. This is always so interesting to me. And they look at somebody who has a better relationship with their adult kids. And there's something inside of you that goes, did I do something wrong? Like there's something about your identity that's connected to how someone else has a relationship with their kids, and you feel the weight of this thing that goes, hey, there's something not right here. Now, that's really connected to the deepest parts of who you are, and it's more of a spiritual thing than it is simply a psychology thing, right? There's something about you that where your identity, we say it this way, your identity is shaped by what or who you are exposed to. And not just that, but the way that you interact and experience those people, right? Now, nobody gets a pass on this. You could be the most confident person in the world. You could have been the athlete who hit a home run every single game. You could have been batting 400. You could be all of these sort of things. You could be the best mom on the planet and still struggle with some form of this like comparison and insecurity, because the deepest parts of who you are, in some ways, are subtly shaped, not just by marketing, but by the people that come alongside of you and see the world that way. Now, I'll tell you a little bit of my story. So I knew early on, pretty early on what I wanted to do, which is not really the funnest thing to say to people, right? Like I knew I wanted to be a pastor pretty early. That's not really what you lead with on a first date, but that was me. Like I was the kid who would line up like Simba and every other bear, and I would like preach to these sort of things as a child, right? Not a great thing to say in middle school to people, but that was me. I knew that pretty early on. Outside, I wanted to be like the next John Mayer or a Major League Baseball player, but neither one of those were going to happen. And so I remember like doing these things, but there was also a part that when I got to college, I actually had to speak for one of the first times in front of people in a classroom. There were like 6 or 7 people around, and part of the thing that I was supposed to speak on was about family. I was supposed to speak on like fatherhood and sexuality, all these sorts of things. And I'll never forget, I was kind of preparing for this talk, and there's this room with this professor who's, really hardcore, and there was like 6 or 8 people in the room. I'll never forget going, I feel really insecure about this. What is it that I actually feel insecure about? And I'll never forget, it wasn't the passage, it wasn't even standing up in front of people, it wasn't even giving a message. The thing that I felt most insecure about was the fact that I didn't grow up in a home with a father in the home. Right? And that deep-rooted insecurity about talking about parenthood or fatherhood or sexuality or talking about, what it means to be married, all these sorts of things, I remember thinking, I've actually never seen it. And there was this deep sort of connection between me and an absence that I had. Why? Because my identity was shaped by what and shaped by a who. Or for me, an absence of a who, of somebody in my life. And that's a deeply rooted thing. There's deeply rooted insecurities that you have that you don't have to carry. There's a deeply rooted insecurity that some of you have every time you sit in a boardroom or a meeting that you don't have to carry. There is a narrative that circles around in the back of your mind and in your heart that says you are not enough for whatever reason. And that is not a narrative that you have to carry. And in fact, the writers of the New Testament take this so seriously. They actually describe this as slavery to these sort of frameworks in our mind. They would describe those kinds of thought processes, these sort of things that just rattle and move through who you assume that you are or who you assume that you are not, as if it's a form of being enslaved in your mind, which leads you to the most raw and painful and real question at times, who am I? And we live in a culture that's asking this question in like 3rd grade now. You know what I mean? Like 5-year-olds are asking the question, who am I? My son is 5. He was trying to describe who he was the other day, and I love this. He loves music, and he'll say, I'm a musician, and I'm an athlete, which means we play basketball in our living room with a Fisher Price goal, and my wife loves it when I hit stuff. And, we have all these, and he's trying to describe himself, and I'm like, he's asking the question, who am I, early. And it's being formed really, really early. Now, some of you have been a part of churches that would talk about who you are, but they would separate these 2 words. They would separate like the theology of things and your identity, right? As if these 2 were completely separated. Now, in some ways they are, right? We talk about theology like this. Theology is ultimately what you believe about God, which is extremely important. Whatever you believe about what's out there or what's next, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, wherever you are on the faith spectrum, there's a part of you that goes, there's something beyond me. What is that thing? That question is in the subset of theology. But the other question about you that I think really connects it is this: what do you believe about yourself, specifically as it relates to whoever is beyond you or whatever is beyond you or that thing that moves beyond you? And we're going to go this far, and then we're going to look at the text today. The question is really this: what you believe about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, is deeply connected to what you believe about God. Now, here's how I think you already know this, even if you're currently struggling with some of these questions. I think you know this because you have bought courses to teach you how to overcome it, and they might have helped for a season, but they never solved the problem. That for you, success, as much as you've had of it and whatever the dollar amount is that you thought would bring you security and end whatever worth questions you had, you got to that point and it never actually fully and finally satisfied the questions that you had. I think you know this on the other side of this because you can be the most popular person that you've ever known and still feel extraordinarily isolated and by yourself. That you could get all of the checkbox right in the things that you feel like should be checked off. And at the end of the day, still feel like it's not enough. Now, there's a word that sometimes we grew up with, that I grew up with as well. It's a word called striving, right? That you're striving to be something or striving to achieve something. It's this idea that you're just constantly sort of straining and reaching for something that's beyond you. And if you're really honest, right? Really, really honest, sometimes we strive to be loved, and you connect the way that you are loved to what you are able to do and accomplish. For sometimes it's noticed or applauded or significant or secure. For sometimes we're just striving to be accepted. And for you, come on, if you're really honest, and if you really like, especially the guys in the room, we're talking about feelings. I know you're done like 11 minutes ago, but just for a second, there's a part of you that goes, even in the most honest moments of your life, when you look in the mirror, or you're laying in bed at night and the fan's going, or your kid's yelling in the background, but you've checked out because they've been yelling for 11 minutes, right? Typically for most of us, one or two of these stands out as something that just lurks in the back of who we are. As something that we can't figure out how to solve. So I'm going to make two statements. The two statements I'm going to make, I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. And if you read these statements and you go, like, I don't know about that, I'm so glad because that's what we're talking about, right? First statement is this: you were never meant to strive for love, or you could plug in significance, or you could plug in acceptance, or noticed, or Instagram famous, or influencer. You were never meant to strive for those things. And you were simply meant to live as if you already were those things. And so here's the thesis, right? So if you're the person who's like, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes and I'm going to check out, here's the thesis of what we're talking about. And that's this: that you're striving for something that I think you've already been given and you already have access to. Sometimes we just ignore the fact that it's there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple verses today. It's in the New Testament. If you're a person who's not a follower of Jesus and you're like, I haven't read the New Testament, I don't believe in it, it's totally fine. Look at this for a minute. There's a guy named Paul who's extraordinarily successful in what he did, one of the sharpest guys. You read through the New Testament, if for nothing else, to see how smart Paul is. He essentially franchised the local church all over the ancient world and went everywhere. Is extraordinarily successful. You're meeting here today in some way because a guy named Paul, thousands of years ago, did something extraordinary throughout the ancient world. Paul was fluent in multiple languages. He was extraordinarily smart. He had this amazing thing that happened in his mind and his heart that moved him in a completely different direction. And he talks about the deepest parts of humanity and who people are within the context of Jesus. And here's what he says, right? He's writing to a group of people in Rome, and he says this: for those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. Right? Now, this isn't a new idea in the ancient world, the idea that you are a child of something that's beyond you. There are a lot of people that would have talked about that. He's talking about this within the context of a group of people who were trying to follow Jesus. He says, look, you're not just a person who follows the way, as they would have said it. You are a person who has been made new and changed and is a new creation from the inside out. Every part of you, you are now a child of the God of the universe. He said, the Spirit you received does not make you slaves. And if you've ever read Romans, I think you should. What Romans does, if we can go back one more second. If you read Romans, this idea of slavery is deeply connected to the ways that you think about yourself in the context of your life. He said, the spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. And then he goes on and he says this. He says, rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, or as a child of the God of the universe. Now, this idea of adoption, I think you can read through, and I think it's interesting if you read through it. If you like to read, scripture, that sort of thing, it's very easy to gloss over this. I love to just pull people back to the moments where a person was adopted, right? Have you ever seen pictures of this? Some of you in the room, maybe you've adopted kids. Some of you maybe have been adopted, right? But we've all seen pictures or videos of a child who was without parents or family that was to come alongside of them, and then a family that said, not only am I going to adopt you, but you are fully a part of our family. This is the kicker, right? Not based on anything that you did. Not based on your worth. Not based on what you did or didn't do or things that you thought or didn't think. You have been adopted and brought into this family because I chose you. And because I picked you. And because you're in our family. I have a friend who was adopted. He didn't know it until he was 18 years old. And his family had this long conversation with him. In some ways, it was like this big revelation. I'll never forget the way that he described the moment that he found out, though. He said, it didn't change the way that I thought about my family. I thought it was so interesting. Because they were always just my family. It was an assumption that he was so in it. And I love this, which speaks to the parents who came alongside of this boy and said, look, you're ours. You're ours. And when Paul talks about this, he goes, there's all of these, ways of thinking that are connected to really you being a slave to these frameworks in your mind. He goes, no. Do you not understand that as somebody who is connected to God, you have been adopted, not based on what you did, but brought into this family in that way. You've been adopted to sonship. And then he says this, and I love this. He goes on and he says, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, I love this. I wish I could play this video. I think I showed it at Easter. How many of you were at Easter, by the way? Anybody at Easter? So you saw this. If you were at Easter, you know this. I played this video of my son saying, Daddy. Do you remember this? There's a lot of scholars who talk about this word Abba. It's connected to these utterings of a baby crying out to his dad, right? Which I didn't know what that was until I had a kid. When they're trying to say your name as father, but can't quite get it out, and it's just kind of like the babbling of a child, right? He's saying it's this innocence and this power and this deeply rooted connection. By that, we could just say, Abba, Father, the God of the universe. You're not distant. You're not just out there. You are connected to me, and I get to be so close to you as if to say, I am like a child responding to a father solely out of love, that adoption. Then he goes on and he says this, now, if we are his children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. And this is one of those verses, to be really honest with you, if you don't love reading the Bible, this is one of those things you gloss over because you don't think of yourself as an heir of anything unless you are, right? If you actually are an heir, you absolutely think of yourself that way. But if you're not, you don't, and I don't either. And the idea of this isn't that you get to drive around in a Bentley, though that would be amazing, or a Tesla. I would just pick that if I had the choice. The idea of this, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, well, what's so bad? Anyway, not today. Yeah. But the idea of this is that you are a co-heir of the fullness of being accepted by the God of the universe, who draws you in and invites you to be a part of this family. Which means this, that the things that you most desire in your life, the love, the acceptance, the security, the things that you most want when it comes to being noticed and having confidence, all of that, isn't connected to some sort of out there sort of thing that you can reach for and grab and just attain. It's actually already yours because the one who gets to decide who you are, the one who shifted and created and is involved with you, says, you are mine. Now, I told you I got a son. I've got a daughter too. She's 2 years old. And if you're a dad, any dads of daughters in the room, just kind of curious, okay. There's something different about having a daughter. I don't know how to explain it fully. It's just different. Like my son and I, he'll wrestle me. He literally just walks sometime and just smacks me on the butt for whatever reason. He want to pick a fight. I'm like, I'm going to win this at least for another year. We'll see what happens after that. But when he turns 6, I don't know. My daughter, though, there's just something that's just so precious about her. I mean, he is too, but there's just something about like my daughter in this way. And there's something that just like, and you get this, it's true with Henry, but it's so true with Eleanor, that there is nothing she could ever do to not be mine. And she's smart. Like at 2 years old, she can already like call me out, which is a lot of fun to watch, right? But there's nothing. And when I see her, there's just only like this deep sort of like love. And she just is that. The other day though, she walked in the room, and again, I don't understand women, I certainly don't understand 2-year-old women. But she walks in this dress that she put on, like a Belle, the princess. I think it was Belle. It's Belle. It's Belle. We're learning princess at our house. I'm gonna get there. And she just walks in and she looks at me and then she just twirls. And then she stops and she just stares at me as if to say, did you take notice and did you see me? Now there's a desire that she has for me to notice her. There's a desire that she has for me to look, and I get all of that. But what I wish she just knew, and it has nothing to do with a twirl, is that there's nothing that she could ever do to be less amazing to me. Now, I love that. And she's going to do that. Hopefully, she'll do that when she's 37. You know what I mean? It'd be kind of awkward at that point with her husband in the room, but still, like, it'd be fun to watch, right? But there's a part of me that goes, I wish I could just instill in my kids that there's nothing you ever have to do to strive to be ... whatever you fill in the blank with. Now, some of you don't know what you think about God, and I totally get that. Some of you have very intellectual questions when it comes to faith. I totally get that. Some of this feels very feely, and God in the universe just wants to give you a hug, get all those things. But at the end of the day for you and what you functionally put into and get out of life, what I wish I could convince every single person of is to live their life in a way where they experience that as if it's true. Because on the other side of that, there is a centeredness to your being in the world that you can only have when you're not trying to grab something that's already yours. You ever met somebody who was deeply centered and you couldn't explain why? You ever met somebody who didn't have it all together, but at the same time you admired them, and when they spoke, you leaned in? You ever met a person who wasn't trying to get anything from you, You ever have that person on social media who likes your post and you know that it's not manipulative, they just liked your picture? And you see this on the inverse too, right? You see it when people are like striving. You can pick this up in conversations. You can pick this up in meetings. You can pick this up in the business world where it's just like, just notice me, or I'm striving for something. I want to. Have you ever met somebody who was just so sure that they have the things that they most crave? Have you ever met a 20-something who didn't give a crap what you thought, and it wasn't in an unhealthy way? It was just there. And the thing is, there's untangling to do, and there's things that you have to like pull apart in your mind and your heart and all these kinds of things. But as you do that, as you do the hard work of that, on the other side of that work is the person that you desperately want to be. No matter how put together you are on the outside, no matter what your Instagram feed looks like, no matter how much success you've been given or that you've made happen for yourself, on the other side of all of that is the person that you desperately want to be. And it's not in anything other than resting in who Jesus has said that you are. So imagine just for a second, right? Even if you don't believe the whole God thing, you're still struggling through some of these questions, like a lot of people in this room, including me at times. The question is this: imagine what would happen if this were true. If you are actually fully loved, that you didn't have to do anything to acquire love, that love was just given to you. Imagine what would happen if you were actually fully noticed. What would your life look like if you were actually noticed and fully seen? That you were actually applauded, right, by the person that you most desired from. Imagine what would happen if you were actually significant and it wasn't based on anything that you did. That you were significant because you are breathing. Imagine the kind of work that you could do in the world if you already knew that you were significant, that you were secure, that you could breathe easy and walk lighter knowing that you are secure and fully accepted. When Paul talks about these types of things and freedom from those mindsets, this is the way that he talks about this. This is to another part of the world in Corinth. This is the words that he says. He says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, we'll talk about that in a second, that person is a new creation, or the new creation has come, the old has gone, and the new is here. We talked a lot about resurrection on Easter, and I think that's this idea that we believe that Jesus certainly did rise from the grave. I do believe that, but on the other side of this, there's also the resurrection that's happening all around you, and in the deepest parts of your hearts that you're not really sure what to do with. And I think that's what Paul is talking about when he says, in Christ. It gets after this question of who am I? And the answer, if we go back to the question to who am I, the deep kind of question to who am I is I am a person who is, if we go to the next one, in Christ, right? I am a person who has already received the things that I most desire, not based off of my merit or my worth or the things that I contribute or how much I do or how many days that I work or how much great of a dad I am or how great of a mom I am, any of those things. It's based off of your full acceptance that God has already seen you and said those things and then puts you in motion to live your life with that kind of freedom and centeredness. So, kind of the ending thing that I want you to be thinking about is this, right? That our lives, right, when it comes to our life, that our identity is fully loved, is fully accepted, and fully secure when it comes to actually having a relationship with Christ. So we're going to invite the band to come up. We're going to end here in just a second with a song. Before we do that, here's what I kind of want you to be thinking about. And if I'm really honest, I think this is like, if I can convince people to sit down and talk about this thing, of all the things that I wish I could get people to talk about, it would be this. Because when you begin to work through this thing, it kind of cuts through the barriers of everything else that you really want to talk about in the world, right? And so I think to myself, like, what would happen, just for a minute, if we knew and were centered on who we were to the point that when we were going to comment something on Facebook, we weren't trying to receive things back. We just were. What would happen if you could actually live in the kind of friendships and relationships with people where you weren't trying to get things from them, but that you are fully free just to do things for other people? Come on, those of you who are in the marketplace, the big question that I would have for anybody in the room who's a leader is what would happen is if your identity wasn't so wrapped up into who was following you and how they were following you, but the only question that you were ever really asking is how can I love and serve people well? You've met those kind of leaders. Those are the people that you love to follow. What would happen if every person in the marketplace assumed that they already had what they needed and simply loved other people well? Jesus talks about this new kingdom that enters into the world, and one of the foundational parts of this new kingdom is that his people weren't so worried about acquiring the things that they wanted. They got to live fully and freely in the world to do good and be good to other people.
How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. My living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Amen. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. that seal the promise. Your buried body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Yeah. Then out of silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the
Hey, thank you so much for joining us for this online service. We're so glad that you decided to be a part of it. And we wanted again to invite you to our Vision Night that's coming up July 11th right here in Bridge Park. We're gonna be doing it at Brick House Blue, and we're gonna be talking more about the kind of church that we're creating and really give you an opportunity to see if this is the kind of church for you. So we would love for you to join us July 11th at 5 p.m. right here in Bridge Park at Brick House Blue. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.